The chamber was cold and sterile, exactly what Sergeant Major Alina Kovac expected from the Galactic Council's flagship interrogation room. Though calling it an interrogation felt too formal for what was actually happening, here she sat in a chair designed for the Vrex species, which meant her feet barely touched the floor, and the backrest pressed uncomfortably against her shoulder blades. But she'd been in worse positions during her 15 years of service. 3 council members faced her across a transparent barrier that probably wasn't just transparent, but also some kind of shield technology, as if they thought she might suddenly leap across the gap and attack them with her bare hands. Thought almost made her smile, but she kept her face neutral to her left sat tribunal member Shirak, a Vrex whose compound eyes glittered like cut gemstones in the harsh overhead lighting. The insectoid's mandibles clicking softly whenever it breathed in. The center was Luminar Representative Cordovdan, its crystalline body refracting light into soft rainbows across the walls. Beautiful and utterly alien in the right. The amphibious Tethian called Speakswithides kept its massive eyes fixed on her, unblinking in that way that always unnerved other species but just made Alina think of Frog's back. Home Thade? Been at this for 6 hours already, asking her the same questions over and over in slightly different configurations. Trying to catch her in a lie or inconsistency. How did she survive? When her ship was destroyed, and where? Was she going? And what was her mission? And did Earth sanction her presence in this sector of space? Alina answered each question the same way she'd answered it the first time, with patience and clarity, because getting angry or defensive would only make them more suspicious. Truth was simple enough that she didn't need to keep track of lies, which was always the best kind of truth to tell. Her ship had been attacked by pirates operating out of the Verge colonies. She'd managed to get to an escape pod before the reactor went critical, and she'd drifted for 3 weeks before the Council patrol found her. Yes, Earth knew she was out here, because this was Council space, and humans had clearance to transit through it under the treaty signed after the Krell Warno. She wasn't a spy or advanced scout for an invasion, because humanity had no interest in conquering the Council when they'd spent the last decade rebuilding relationships after saving everyone's collective necks. Rack's mandibles clicked more rapidly, a sign of agitation that Alina had learned to recognize during her time working with Vrex security forces on Kepler Station. Your species remains an enigma to us, Sergeant Major, the Vrex said through its translator, the device rendering its chittering speech into flat, emotionless standard galactic. Your capacity for violence is well documented, but your motivations remain unclear. Alina kept her hands folded on the table in front of her, a deliberately non-threatening posture. My motivations are the same as any soldier's, she said calmly. I serve to protect those who can't protect themselves. Cordovdan's crystalline structure shifted slightly, creating a sound like wind chimes, which Elena's translator interpreted as skepticism. We have reviewed human history, the Luminar said. Your species has engaged in continuous warfare for its entire recorded existence. Yet you claim to value peace. This again, Alina thought. How many times would they circle back to this particular concern? We value peace, she confirmed. That's why we're willing to fight for it. Because we know what happens when no one stands against aggression. Speaks with tides made. A gurgling sound that didn't translate, its massive eyes narrowing slightly. We wish to show you something, the Tethian said, a test of sorts. To better understand human psychology, Alina raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Waiting, the lights in the chamber dimmed, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them, showing what was clearly combat footage from a ship's internal cameras. The time stamp in the corner indicated it was 15 years old, and Alina felt a strange prickle of recognition even before the footage began to play. The showed a corridor aboard a station or large ship, the kind with industrial walls and exposed piping that spoke of function over aesthetics. Suddenly, the corridor's far end exploded, inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal as something breached the whole. Figures in combat. Armor poured through the gap, moving with practiced efficiency that Alina recognized immediately as human boarding doctrine. The camera angle shifted, showing the defenders a mix of what looked like Vrex and Tethian security forces. Taking cover behind hastily erected barriers, the human Marines advanced under covering fire. Their movements coordinated and precise. One Marine broke from the group and sprinted forward, sliding into cover as plasma bolts scorched the air where they'd been a moment before. Marine's armor had distinctive markings on the shoulder, a red wolf's head that Alina hadn't seen in years but would never forget that was her old unit. The 40-second void breakers. The footage continued, showing the firefight in brutal detail, the way the Marines used grenades to clear strong points, the systematic advance that gave the defenders no time to regroup. The final breach into what looked like a command center. The last segment showed a single Marine, smaller than the others, their armor scorched and dented, standing over 3 wounded wrecks, civilians, and holding off a counterattack from what must have been the station's remaining security forces. Lena watched the Marine take a hit to the shoulder, stagger, and keep fighting. She watched the Marine's ammunition counter drop to 0. She watched the Marine draw a combat knife and prepare for a final stand before friendly forces arrived to secure the position. The footage ended, and the lights came back up. Alina realized all 3 tribunal members were watching her intently, waiting for her reaction. She'd known what they were showing her halfway through the first breach, had recognized the battle the moment she saw her unit's insignia. But she'd watched the entire thing without changing expression. Now she allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Oh, that's from my first deployment," she said. And then she yawned. It's not from disrespect, but because 6 hours of interrogation after months in stasis had left her genuinely exhausted. Tarsus for raid. Year R6C. I was 23. The silence in the room was absolute. SHK. Mandibles had stopped clicking, entirely cordoved. Dawn's inner light pulsed erraticalis peaks with tides. Membranes flickered across its eyes in rapid succession. A sign of extreme agitation. "That was you," Shirak said finally. "And it wasn't a question." "Yeah," Alina confirmed, leaning back in the uncomfortable chair. "I can tell you exactly what I did wrong during that breach if you want. Spent 2 years in advanced training fixing those mistakes." She pointed at the hologram, even though it was no longer active. "See, I came around that corner too wide. Exposed my left side for almost a full second. That's how I took that shoulder hit. My sergeant chewed me out for a week." "You were defending Vrex civilians." Speaks with Side said slowly. "They were civilians," Alina replied simply. "Didn't matter what species they were. The footage was recovered from a pirate stronghold," Cordoveldon said. "They kept it as a warning to show their recruits. We acquired it during anti-piracy operations. We believed it showed the kind of violence humans were capable of. We played it to gauge your reaction to human combat tactics." Alina nodded, understanding now, and instead of being horrified or traumatized. "I critiqued my own performance," yes, Shirak said quietly. "Does that frighten you?" Alina asked. The 3 tribunal members looked at each other, and Alina saw the moment when their entire understanding of this situation shifted. They'd thought they were interrogating a survivor, maybe a merchant or explorer, someone they could categorize and file away. Instead, they just confirmed they had a decorated combat veteran, someone who'd been fighting since before some council members had even heard of humanity, someone who looked at footage of themselves nearly dying and only saw tactical lessons it should. Alina said into the silence, but her voice was gentle. "Understanding it should frighten you, because it means you're finally seeing what humans really are." She leaned forward, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "But here's what you need to understand. I'm not your enemy. I never was. And if you'd asked me about my service, instead of trying to trick me with combat footage, I would have told you all of this hours ago." Shirak made a gesture that Elena's cultural database identified as profound discomfort. "We have made an error in judgment." "Yeah," Alina agreed. "You have, so let's start over. You want to know about humans and war? I can tell you about that. But first you need to understand something important." She waited until she had their complete attention. "We're good at violence because we had to be," she said. "But that doesn't mean we enjoy it. That Marine you saw in the footage, she had nightmares for 5 years after Tarsus 4. Still does sometimes, but she kept serving because someone had to. And she'd rather carry that burden than let someone unprepared face it instead. This is the human contradiction," Cordoveldon said. "You are capable of terrible violence, yet claim to be protectors." "No contradiction," Alina corrected. We're protectors because we're capable of terrible violence. Ask yourself this. Who better to stand between civilians and danger than someone who understands danger? Intimately, the tribunal members exchanged glances again, and Alina could see them reassessing everything they thought they knew good. The council diplomatic vessel harmonies. Voice drifted through the outer reaches of what its crew would later learn was called the Sol System, its sensors picking up the unmistakable signature of a generation. Ship traveling at a fraction of light speed, and ambassador voices that calm stood on the bridge, her Tethian frame casting a long shadow under the soft bioluminescent lighting that her species preferred. Watching the data streams with growing curiosity, analysis confirms they are using fusion propulsion, her science officer reported. A young Vrex named Katic, whose mandibles clicked with excitement. Primitive by our standards, but remarkably efficient for their technological level. Voices that come made a gesture of acknowledgement, her webbed fingers creating small ripples in the air. Prepare first contact protocols, standard greeting and mathematical sequences. Let's welcome our new neighbors properly. What she didn't know, what none of them could know, was that this moment would change the Galactic Council forever. The human ship was called Perseverance, which the Council's translation algorithms would render as something like continuing despite difficulty, though that didn't quite capture the stubborn determination the word carried in its original language. Captain Maria Santos stood in Perseverance's observation deck when the alien vessel appeared on their sensors, her heart hammering against her ribs in a way it hadn't since the resource wars ended. Confirm that contact, she ordered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse, and get me Ambassador Chen. We're about to make history. Ambassador David Chen arrived within minutes. Straightening his jacket, even though humanity had long since abandoned formal dress codes during the desperate years of rebuilding Earth, they're hailing us, the communications officer announced. Broadcasting in mathematical sequences, primes, and basic arithmetic. Classic first contact protocol. Chen smiled despite his nervousness. At least someone out here read the same books we did, respond in kind. Let's tell them we're friendly. The exchange of information took 3 days. Both species learning each other's languages through patient transmission of images, sounds, and mathematical concepts when they finally achieved basic communication. Voices that calm invited the humans aboard Harmony's voice for face-to-face talks. Yen brought a small delegation, including Captain Santos and Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, Earth's leading xenobiologist, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of meeting actual aliens. The airlock cycled, and the humans got there first. Look at the Galactic Council's representative Ostakam. Stood nearly 3 meters tall, her amphibious features simultaneously familiar and strange, reminding Chen of the giant salamanders that had gone extinct during the resource wars beside her. Katic's insectoid form gleamed under the ship's lighting, compound eyes reflecting the humans in 1,000 tiny fragments. Luminar named Resonates with Truth completed the welcoming party, its crystalline structure creating small rainbows whenever it moved. Welcome, Voices that Come said, her translator rendering her species' gurgling speech into perfect English. Welcome to the greater galactic community. We are honored to meet you. Chen felt tears prick his eyes and blinked them away, wondering if the aliens would understand the gesture. The honor is ours. Humanity has dreamed of this moment for centuries. The initial exchanges went well, both sides sharing basic information about their worlds, their cultures, their histories. The council representatives seemed genuinely interested in Earth, asking questions about human biology, social structures, technological development, but Chen noticed a shift in the atmosphere when they began discussing human culture in more detail. Okonkwo was enthusiastically explaining human literature when Resonates with Truth interrupted, its crystalline form pulsing with what the translator identified as confusion. Your stories contain a remarkable amount of violence, Illuminar observed. This tale of Beowulf, it describes brutal combat and death in explicit detail. Is this typical of human narrative? Okonkwo paused, glancing at Chen. Well, yes, I suppose it is. Our myths and legends often involve conflict, heroes overcoming adversity through strength and courage, but also killing, Kachik pointed out. His mandibles clicking rapidly, this Beowulf tears the arm from his enemy. Your people find this entertaining. The conversation grew more uncomfortable as they continued. Captain Santos mentioned humanity's history of warfare, trying to be honest about Earth's violent past while emphasizing how far they'd come. Voices they'd come listened with what seemed like growing concern, her large eyes unblinking. How many wars has your species fought? She asked. Finalist Santos looked at Chen, who looked at Okonkwo, none of them quite sure how to answer. We don't have an exact count, Chen admitted. Thousands. Certainly, maybe tens of thousands, depending on how you define war. But that's over our entire recorded history of 10,000 years or so. The council representatives exchanged glances that the humans couldn't quite interpret. Thousands, voices the calm repeated. We have had perhaps 200 conflicts in the council's entire history spanning 50,000 years. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Your world must have been incredibly harsh. Resonates with truth, said, and there was something like pity in its tone. Dar. Okonkwo stepped forward, her scientist's mind already trying to bridge the gap. Can I ask about your homeworlds? The planets where your species evolved. What followed was a revelation that explained so much. The Tethians evolved on a water-rich world with abundant resources and few predators. Their greatest challenge had been cooperation for communal breeding grounds. The Vrex came from a world of massive fungal forests where food literally grew on trees, and the biggest danger was parasitic infection rather than predation. The Luminars were silicon-based life forms from a geologically stable world where competition was measured in centuries and violence was almost unknown. Felt his stomach sink as he understood the gap between them. Earth was different, he said quietly. Everything on our world evolved to kill everything else. We have predators that hunt in packs, plants that poison animals, parasites that control their hosts' minds. The ocean alone contains thousands of species designed purely for killing and humans, Santos added. We're persistence hunters. We evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. To work in groups to bring down animals 10 times our size? To use tools to kill from a distance? Voices. Akam's skin shifted to a pale color that the translator identified as distress. Your entire biosphere is based on predation for billion years of it, Okonkwo confirmed. Every species on Earth is either a predator, prey, or both. It shaped everything about us. Our biology, our psychology, our culture. Kotick made a gesture with his forelimbs. This explains your entertainment, your literature. You are not obsessed with violence. You are reflecting the reality of your evolution. Exactly, Chen said. Relieved that at least one of them understood. We don't celebrate war because we love it. We tell stories about it because it's part of who we are. It's how we survived long enough to build civilization. The meeting continued, but the easy warmth of first contact had cooled considerably over the following weeks. As both sides prepared formal treaties and cultural exchanges, Chen noticed the council representatives growing more cautious around the humans. He overheard conversations not meant for human ears. Debates about whether humanity should be quarantined, whether they posed a threat to the peaceful galactic community. One night, unable to sleep in Perseverance's guest quarters, Chen found Captain Santos in the observation deck. Staring at the stars. They're afraid of us, Santos said without preamble. Can you blame them? Chen replied. Sitting beside her, imagine if the first aliens we met were evolved from something even more violent than us. We'd be terrified. Santos was quiet for a long moment. Are we monsters, David? Are we the scary aliens in someone else's first contact story? Chen thought about Beowulf, about the Iliad, about every war memorial on Earth and the billions who died in conflicts stretching back to prehistory. We're survivors, he said finally. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. And we not only survived, we thrived. We built art and music and philosophy while fighting for every scrap of survival. That doesn't answer my question, no, Chen agreed. But maybe that's because there isn't a simple answer. Maybe we're both, survivors and monsters. Protectors and warriors. It depends on who's asking and what they need from us. 2 months after first contact, the council issued their decision. Humanity would be granted probationary membership, limited access to certain technologies and space lanes. with regular reviews to assess their integration. Into galactic society, it was less than Chen had hoped for, but more than he'd feared. Especially after overhearing the quarantine debate's ambassador voices delivered the news personally, her large eyes meeting Chen's with something that might have been regret. "We understand this is not what you hoped for," she said. "But you must understand, your species is unlike anything we have encountered. We need time to understand you better, to determine if your violent nature can be reconciled with galactic peace." The emergency broadcast reached Earth at 0347 hours Galactic Standard Time. And Admiral Rebecca Chen was pulled from her bed by an aide whose face was pale, with something that looked like terror, "Ma'am. You need to see this," the aide said. Pulling up a holographic display before Chen had even fully processed being awake, image showed a Galactic Council emergency session. And Rebecca recognized the amphitheater where humanity had been granted provisional membership 2 years ago, but the council members weren't debating trade agreements or cultural exchanges now. They were screaming over each other in a dozen different languages, their translators struggling to keep up with the chaos. "What am I looking at?" Rebecca demanded. Pulling on her uniform jacket, the Krell, her aide said, "The word heavy with meaning, they came out of dark space 6 days ago. The council's been trying to handle it themselves, but the display shifted to combat footage that made Becca's blood run cold. Ships. Massive, organic-looking vessels that seemed to be grown rather than built were tearing through council defense fleets like tissue paper. The council ships were beautiful, elegant things designed as much for aesthetics as function. Their weapons precise, and their tactics clearly built around minimizing casualties. Krell had no such considerations. Their bioships crashed into council vessels with brutal efficiency, boarding pods punching through holes to release swarms of creatures that moved with insectoid coordination. Rebecca watched a Vrex cruiser try to surrender. Broadcasting ceasefire signals on all frequencies, the Krell response was to tear it apart and harvest the crew. "Oh God," Rebecca whispered. "There's more," her aide said grimly. "The council is requesting our help. They're offering full membership, technology sharing, protected territories, anything we want." Rebecca looked at the young officer. Seeing the question in his eyes, "They're desperate," she said. "They've never faced anything like this before. Should I alert the Security Council?" "Get authorization for military deployment." Rebecca was already moving toward the door. "No time? By the time they debate and vote, the Krell will have taken another 3 systems. Wake up the 3rd Fleet and get me Admiral Kowalski." "We're going in hot." The aide looked shocked. "Ma'am, without authorization, that's exactly what they need." Rebecca cut him off. "The council doesn't understand war, not real war. They think it's something you negotiate and mediate, but the Krell aren't here to negotiate. So we do what humans do best." She didn't finish the sentence, but the aide understood anyway. 6 hours later, the human 3rd Fleet dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Luminara system, and what they found was worse than the footage had suggested. 3 council defense fleets were attempting a coordinated retreat, trying to evacuate civilian transports while holding back the Krell advance. It wasn't working. The Krell bioships moved through the defensive formations like sharks through a school of fish, separating and destroying council vessels with brutal precision. Rebecca stood on the bridge of the carrier, indomitable, watching the tactical display and calculating odds that would have made anyone else order a retreat fleet composition. She ordered 12 carriers, 40 destroyers, 60 frigates, and about 200 smaller craft, her XO reported. "We're outnumbered roughly 5 to 1. The bridge crew was silent. Waiting for her decision, Rebecca thought about the council's beautiful ships. Designed for a galaxy that had never known real war, she thought about humanity's vessels. Built from the lessons of 10,000 years of killing each other, she thought about the Krell, who were about to learn what happened when you threatened a species that had clawed its way up from the bottom of Earth's food chain. "All ships." "This is Admiral Chen," she said, her voice calm and clear. "We're not here to win a fair fight. We're here to save those civilians and send a message. Combat protocol, Omega-7. No prisoners, no quarter. Total warfare authorization," somewhere in the back of her mind. She knew the council observers monitoring this channel would be horrified by those words, but they'd learned 3rd Fleet. Engage at will. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations, both as a masterclass in human combined arms warfare and as a case study in controlled brutality. The human fleet didn't advance in neat formations like the Council fleets. They scattered into attack groups that moved independently, coordinating through constant communication rather than rigid tactical doctrine. Destroyers launched swarms of missiles that the Krell bioships tried to shoot down, only to discover each missile carried not explosives, but marker beacons that painted targets for the second. Wave frigates dove close to Krell vessels, firing not at hulls but at the organic sensor clusters that dotted their surfaces, blinding them. Then the carriers launched their fighters, and the Krell learned what human pilots could do when they stopped caring about. Survival fighter squadrons screamed through the debris field, using wrecked ships as cover, targeting the Krell boarding pods before they could launch, sacrificing themselves to buy time for their wingmats. Rebecca watched a pilot named Sarah Kim ram her damaged fighter into a Krell bioship's engine cluster, the explosion taking out 3 more human fighters, but crippling a vessel that had destroyed. To Council cruisers, "Someone get me Kim's family contact," Rebecca said quietly. "They deserve to know she died saving thousands." The battle raged for 6 hours, and with each passing minute the human fleet showed the Council what total war actually meant when a destroyer lost main power. Its captain ordered the crew to evacuate, and then manually piloted the dead ship into a cluster of Krell vessels, detonating the reactor when the Krell tried to board the Indomitable. Rebecca herself led the counterboarding action, her security team fighting with a ferocity that made the Krell warriors hesitate for the first time in their invasion. That hesitation cost them the ship by hour 7. The Krell were retreating, their bioships damaged and disoriented by tactics they'd never encountered. The Council fleets had successfully evacuated the civilian transports, pulling back to a defensive position while the humans pursued the Krell, harrying them all the way out of the system. Rebecca stood in the Indomitable's damaged bridge, her uniform scorched and her hands shaking from adrenaline crash. Watching the Krell fleet casualty report, she said 43% fleet casualties. "Ma'am," her XO reported, his voice hollow. "The Valiant, Resolute, and Guardian's Pride are total losses. 6 more ships critically damaged." Rebecca closed her eyes, doing the math. Roughly 30,000 dead or wounded, the largest single battle casualties in human history since the resource wars, and the civilians all evacuated. "Ma'am, 0 civilian casualties. The Council transports made it out?" Rebecca nodded, feeling the weight of every death settle on her shoulders. 30,000 humans dead to save. Council civilians who'd been debating whether to trust humanity just 2 years ago. "Ma'am." Incoming transmission from the Council flagship, the communications officer announced. Rebecca straightened her uniform, trying to look like an admiral instead of a soldier who'd just spent an hour fighting in corridors. The holographic display showed High Arbiter Crystalline Thought, the current head of the Galactic Council, its luminous form pulsing with colors that Rebecca's translator identified as shock and awe. "Admiral Chen," the Luminar said. "We, that is the Council, we have never witnessed." "Your tactics were effective," Rebecca supplied. "That's what war looks like. Arbiter, real war. The kind where you fight to eliminate the threat completely, because anything less just means more dead later, but the cost." Crystalline Thought protested. "Your casualties are, you sacrifice so many to save your people," Rebecca said, and she couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "Those 30,000 humans died so that your civilians could live. Don't dishonor their sacrifice by telling me the cost was too high." The Arbiter was silent for a long moment. "You are correct," it said finally. "Forgive my insensitivity. Your warriors are heroes. All of them." Rebecca felt some of her anger drain away. They were soldiers doing what soldiers do, protecting those who can't protect themselves. "The Council wishes to formally request continued military support," Crystalline Thought said. "The Krell have taken 12 systems in the past week. Our fleets cannot stop them. You need humans to do the fighting," Rebecca finished. "Because we're good at it and you're not. Because we come from a world where everything was designed to kill us, and you come from worlds where life was a gift. Yes," the Arbiter said simply. Rebecca looked around her damaged bridge. At her exhausted crew, at the tactical display showing the cost of their victory as she thought about Earth, barely recovered from its own near extinction. Being asked to fight someone else's war, she thought about the Council's probationary membership offer, the careful distance they'd maintained from humanity. She thought about 30,000 dead humans and 0 dead civilians will fight, she said. Not because we want to or because you're offering us rewards, but because someone has to, and we're the only ones who can thank you, Admiral. The war against the Krell lasted 18 months, and when it finally ended, the Galactic Council had been saved but fundamentally changed. The final battle took place at the Krell's primary hive world, deep in what had been dark space, where Admiral Chen led a combined fleet of human and council ships in an assault that military historians would later call either brilliant or insane, depending on their species. Humans insisted on going in first, their ships modified with armor plating stripped from destroyed Krell vessels, turning the enemy's own biology against them. Lena Kovac, now a decorated corporal with 4 major engagements under her belt, stood in the hangar bay of the assault carrier Relentless, waiting for the drop with her squad. They'd lost half their original numbers at Tarsus 4, gained replacements who died at the Battle of Kepler's Edge, and now we're down to a core of 9 veterans who'd survived everything the Krell could throw at them. You ever think about after? Private Morrison asked, his hand shaking slightly as he checked his armor seals for the 3rd time. Lena glanced at him. This kid who'd lied about his age to enlist after the Krell destroyed his family's colony ship? Barely 18 now and looking 50 in his eyes after what? She said after the war. When we go home, what do we do, Sergeant Major Okafor? Now missing his left arm from the elbow down and refusing to take a desk job, snorted from his position by the drop pod. We don't go home, Morrison. Soldiers like us don't get to go home, Sergeant. Alina started to protest. She knows I'm right. Kofor cut her off. Looking at Alina with understanding that hurt worse than any wound, we've seen too much, done too much. The people back on Earth, they'll thank us, and mean it. But they won't understand, they can't. Morrison looked between them. Confusion and fear warring on his young face. Alina wanted to tell him Okafor was wrong, that they'd find peace somehow, that the nightmares would fade and the phantom sounds of combat would stop echoing in their heads. But she'd learned to stop lying to herself 6 months ago. We do our job, she said instead. We finish this, we save everyone we can, and we figure out the rest later. The drop alarm sounded. Red lights flooding the hangar. Move out, Okafor ordered. And they filed into the drop pod with the practiced efficiency of veterans who'd done this too. Many times the descent through the Krell homeworld's atmosphere was rough. Point defense fire from bioweapons platforms, turning the sky into a maze of explosions and debris. Alina's pod took a glancing hit that sent them spinning, and she closed her eyes, counting her breaths the way the counselor back on Relentless had taught Heron through the nose for 4 seconds. Hold for 7, out through the mouth for a tit. Didn't stop the fear, but it kept her functional, which was all that mattered. The pod hit ground hard enough to rattle her teeth, and then the doors blew, and they were out. Moving through a nightmare landscape of organic architecture and screaming Krell warriors, the battle lasted 6 hours. Human Marines pushing through the hive complexes while fleet weapons reduced the orbital defenses to burning. Rubel. Alina lost Morrison in the first hour. Watched him get dragged into a side passage by 3 Krell warriors. Heard his screams cut short over the comm. Killed 7 Krell in the next 30 seconds. Rage and grief making her movements sharp. An efficient of 4 pulled her back before she could pursue into an obvious ambush. His remaining hand gripping her shoulder with bruising force. He's gone, Corporal Okafor said. Don't waste his death. Alina wanted to scream at him, to tell him Morrison deserved better than being written off. But she knew he was right. That was the worst part. Knowing he was right by R4, they'd reached the primary hive chamber, where a Krell queen the size of a transport ship coordinated her swarm's defense. Admiral Chen had given specific orders about the queens. Capture, if possible, for intelligence purposes. Eliminate if capture proved impossible. It proved impossible. Alina was one of 3 survivors from her squad who made it out of that chamber, and she carried Okafor's dog tags because he'd used himself. as a living shield to get her close enough to plant the fusion charge. The explosion that killed the Queen could be seen from orbit when the dropship picked up Alina and the other survivors. She was covered in burns and bleeding from a dozen wounds, but all she could think about was Okaffer's last words. "Someone's got to make it home to tell them it mattered," he'd said, shoving her toward the exit while he armed the charge. "Make it you, Kovac. You're strong enough to carry it." The war ended 3 weeks later with the Queens dead and their coordinated hive mind shattered. The remaining Krell forces became disorganized and easy to eliminate. Human hunter-killer squads spent months tracking down the survivors, making sure not a single Krell remained to rebuild. The Council observers called it genocide. Admiral Chen called it practical necessity. "They're not a species. They're a plague," she said in her testimony before the Council Ethics Committee. "You don't negotiate with a plague. You don't imprison a plague. You eliminate it before it can spread again." The Council censured her, but didn't remove her from command, because they needed her expertise for the cleanup. Operation Zelina attended 17 memorial services in the month after the war's end, listening to officials praise the sacrifice of soldiers they'd never met. She stood at attention while they played music and made speeches, her face a mask of calm professionalism inside. She was screaming. The nightmares started 2 months after she returned to Earth's dream. She was back in the hive chamber, watching Okaffer die over and over, or she dreamed Morrison was still alive somewhere. Calling for help she couldn't give the counselors, said it was post-traumatic stress, that it was normal for combat veterans at time would help. They were wrong about the time part. 6 months after the war, Alina volunteered for security duty on Kepler Station, a joint human council facility that monitored the former Krell territories. Her mother cried when she told her, begging Alina to stay on Earth, to rest, to heal. "I can't heal, Mom," Alina said, knowing it would hurt but needing to be honest. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them. Everyone we lost. And the only thing that makes it better is knowing I'm still doing something useful. You've done enough." Her mother pleaded. Lena hugged her, memorizing the warmth and safety of it, knowing she'd never feel quite comfortable in that warmth again. "I haven't," she said quietly, "because it's not about enough. It's about being someone who can stand between the people I love and the things that want to hurt them. And I can't stop being that person just because the immediate threat is gone." On Kepler Station, she met Voices.com. The Tethian ambassador, who'd been part of humanity's first contact team, the old ambassador, looked at Alina with her large, wise eyes and made a gesture of recognition. "You are changed," Voices.com said. "The war has left its mark on you." Alina nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I owe you an apology," the ambassador continued. "When we first met your species, we were afraid of your capacity for violence. We thought it made you dangerous. We were right. But we were also wrong." "How do you mean?" Voices.com settled her massive frame into a chair designed for her species. "We thought your violence was a flaw, a darkness that might consume you and those around you. But watching your people fight the Krell, I realized something. Your violence is protective, sacrificial. You do not fight because you enjoy it, but because you cannot bear to see others suffer." Alina felt tears threatening and blinked them back. "That doesn't make it hurt less." "No," the ambassador agreed. "And that is the part we did not understand. That your warriors carry the weight of what they do. That it costs you something precious every time you fight." They sat in silence for a while. Ambassador and soldier, while station life continued around them. Finally, Voices.com spoke again. "The Council is debating what to do about humanity now that the war is over. Some want to grant you full membership and honors. Others fear what you've become." "And what have we become?" Alina asked the Galaxy's shield. The ambassador said simply, "The ones who will pay the price others cannot or will not pay." And that terrifies some council members because it means acknowledging that their peaceful civilization only exists because someone else is willing to do violence on their behalf. Lena thought about that. About being a shield, about standing between soft civilization and hard reality. Is that so wrong? She asked. "No." Voices.com said. "But it is sad because shields get battered and broken. And I fear humanity will wear itself down, protecting a galaxy that may never fully appreciate the cost." Lena smiled without humor. That's what makes us human, I think. We do it anyway 3 years after the war. Alina made lieutenant and took command of a rapid response team based on Luminara Prime 5 years after. She made captain and saved a Vrex colony from pirates who'd stolen Krell bioweapons 8 years after. She made major and led the defense of a research station against rebels who wanted to resurrect Krell genetics for weapons research. Put them down with extreme prejudice in years after the war. She was offered early retirement with full honors. A quiet life on Earth, or any council world she chose, declined, and requested reassignment to Frontier Security. The nightmares never stopped. But she learned to function through them, learned to carry the weight of memory, and lost the way Okafor had taught her. The tribunal chamber felt colder on the 7th day of Elena's interrogation. Or maybe that was just her perception after spending a week being carefully dissected by questions designed to expose humanity's threat. Level Sergeant Major Alina Kovac, now 41 years old, with more combat citations than she could count, and scars, both visible and hidden, sat across from the 3 council members who'd been trying to understand her for Daysteed, shown her the combat footage from Tarsus 4 on day 1. Trying to shock or intimidate her, they'd shown her diplomatic records of humanity's first contact on day 2. Trying to catch inconsistencies in how humans presented themselves, is Theed, shown her casualty reports from the Krell War on day 3. The numbers so high, they'd made Cordovdon's crystalline. Structured dim with distressed, shown her psychological evaluations on day 4. Profiles that painted human soldiers as walking trauma cases held together by duty and medication thide. Shown her political debates on day 5. Council members arguing whether humanity should be quarantined, controlled, or embraced, and, through it all, Alina had answered every question with patient honesty, explaining what humans were and why they fought and what it cost them. Now on day 7, the tribunal seemed to finally be reaching some kind of conclusion. Chirac leaned forward, compound eyes glittering in the harsh light. We have reviewed your service record, Sergeant Major. 47 combat deployments over 18 years, 12 decorations for valor. 3 confirmed civilian population saves totaling approximately 2.7 million individuals, Alina nodded. Wondering where this was going, you have also killed an estimated 4,800 enemy combatants. The Vrex continued. With confirmed kills numbering in the hundreds, you are, by any measure, an extraordinarily effective warrior. I did what needed doing. Alina said, simply speaks with tides, made a gurgling sound that translated as contemplation. But you also suffer from documented post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic pain from old injuries, survivor's guilt, and recurring nightmares that medical intervention has been unable to eliminate. Also true. Lena confirmed, yet you continue to serve, Cordovdon said, its rainbow light pulsing with confusion. Despite the obvious cost to your well-being, despite having earned retirement with honors multiple times, you continue to volunteer for combat assignments. Alina took a breath, trying to find words to explain something she'd never quite articulated even to herself, because someone has to. And I'd rather it be someone who understands the cost than someone who still thinks war is clean or heroic. The 3 tribunal members exchanged glances. That silent communication Alina had learned to recognize over the past week finally. Chirac spoke the question they'd been circling around for 7 days: are humans dangerous? Sergeant Major Kovac Alina looked at each of them in turn. These representatives of species that had never known Earth's particular brand of survival, pressure she thought about lying, about softening the truth to make it more palatable. But she'd been honest so far, and saw no reason to stop now. Yes, she said clearly. Absolutely yes. We're the descendants of persistence hunters who ran prey to exhaustion, of tribes who fought over every scrap of arable land, of empires built on conquest and maintained through force. Violence is part of our heritage and ways. Your species can't fully comprehend because you never needed it to survive. Dom's light flickered with what might have been fear. Then how can we trust you if your species is inherently violent? What prevents you from turning that violence against the Council? This was the moment Alina realized. The question that would determine humanity's place in the galaxy going forward. She stood slowly, her movement causing the guards stationed at the door to tense. Hands moving toward weapons. You can't trust us not to be dangerous, Alina said, her voice carrying the weight of 18 years fighting in the dark. That would be asking us to be something we're not. But you can trust us to be dangerous on your behalf. She walked to the transparent barrier separating her from the tribunal. Seeing her reflection overlaid on their alien forms, every human who serves in galactic defense knows what we are, she continued. We know our history. We've studied the wars that nearly destroyed us. We've seen what happens when our violent nature is turned inward. And we've made a choice. What choice? Speaks with Stides. Asked quietly to use what we are. What evolution made us? To protect those who didn't have to become what we became, Elena said. Your species evolved on worlds where life was a gift, where cooperation was natural, where violence was rare enough to be shocking. Our world was different. Earth spent 4 billion years teaching everything on it to kill or die. And humans learned that lesson better than any other species. She pressed her hand against the barrier, feeling the slight electric tingle of the containment field. But we also learned something else, she said. We learned that strength without purpose is just brutality, that violence without cause is just evil. We learned to channel what we are toward, protecting the weak instead of preying on them. Sirac's mandibles clicked rapidly. You claim moral superiority because you choose not to abuse your capacity for violence? No, Alina shook her head. I'm claiming we understand what we are and have decided what to do about it. Humans aren't morally superior to anyone. We're just uniquely qualified to do things other species find abhorrent. She turned to face them directly. You want to know if humanity will turn on the Council? Here's my answer. Humans have spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. We got very good at it. We developed weapons that could sterilize continents, tactics that could break nations, strategies that made war into an exact science. The tribunal was silent. Listening, and then we stopped, Alina said. Not because we couldn't win anymore, not because we ran out of enemies, but because we decided it was wrong. We chose cooperation over conquest. We chose to build instead of destroy. If we could make that choice about our own species, about people who looked like us and spoke our languages and shared our cultures, why would we betray the galaxy we bled to protect? She walked back to her chair and sat down. Suddenly tired, I've fought in 47 deployments, she said quietly. I've killed thousands and saved millions. I carry the weight of every life I took and every life I couldn't save. My sleep is filled with nightmares, and my body is held together with scar tissue and military-grade painkillers. This is what it costs to be humanity's shield. Alina looked each tribunal member in the eye. So ask yourself this. Would a species planning betrayal do this to themselves? Would we sacrifice so much of our sanity and health to protect you if we were just waiting for the right moment to turn on you? The silence that followed was profound, short of Dawn's. Internal light pulsed in patterns that Elena's translator interpreted as deep. Thoughts peaks with Tide's membrane flickered. Across its eyes several times Scarex's mandibles had stopped clicking. Entirely finally, the Vrek spoke. We need time to deliberate. Take all the time you need, Alina said. I'm not going anywhere. The tribunal members left through a side door. Leaving Alina alone with the guards, she closed her eyes and leaned back in the uncomfortable chair. Exhausted from 7 days of interrogation and 18 years of war, 6 hours later, they returned. Elena could read the verdict in their body language before anyone spoke. But she waited for the formal announcement. Sirac stood at the center position, its compound eyes reflecting Elena's image. Thousands of times the tribunal has reached a decision, it said formally. After extensive review of human history, military records, and personal testimony, we have concluded the following. Alina braced herself. Humanity is dangerous, Sirac continued. This cannot be denied. Your capacity for violence exceeds anything the Council has previously encountered. Your ability to wage war is unparalleled in known space. Your soldiers carry scars that would destroy most species. Here it comes, Alina thought. The quarantine order, or worse, however, and Sirac's tone shifted slightly. We also recognize that humanity's violence is not malicious. It is protective. It is sacrificial. It is the violence of a species that will burn itself to ashes to save others. Kordofdan stepped forward. Its light brightening. We were wrong to fear you. We should have feared for you, 'cause you are destroying yourselves piece by piece to be our shield. Speaks with tides. Made a sound that translated as solemn agreement. The question was never whether we could trust humans not to be dangerous. The question was whether we deserved the sacrifice you were making. Alina felt something in her chest tighten. The tribunal's verdict is as follows, Shirak announced. Humanity is granted full military autonomy within Council space. With authority to act as needed for the defense of member species, you will serve as the primary defensive force. With Council fleets providing support under human tactical command, Alina blinked. Not quite believing what she was hearing. Furthermore, Kordofdan added, the Council formally acknowledges the debt we owe to human warriors. Every soldier who has served, every life sacrificed, every soul scarred in our defense. You have given us a gift we can never fully repay. We don't want repayment, Alina said, her voice rough. We just want the galaxy to understand what it costs.